The lock clicked shut behind her, a sound as final as a coffin lid. Rain slicked the polished marble steps of the New York City brownstone, making them treacherous. He didn't even give her a coat. Julian Thorne, the man she had loved, the man who had molded her and then broken her, stood silhouetted in the doorway, a figure of pure, cold indifference. He had cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart shattered into a million pieces, calling her his greatest failed project. But they never imagined that the woman they threw away would return not as a beggar, but as the bride of a man whose name made emperors tremble. How does a forgotten wife left with nothing come to stand at the pinnacle of power? This is the story of Amelia Thorne's fall and the spectacular rise of Amelia Sterling. The late September air in Manhattan had a bite to it, a promise of the brutal winter to come. For Amelia, the cold was already bone deep. She stood on the sidewalk of East 72nd Street, the fine wool of her dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin, now damp with a mixture of rain and tears. The door to her life, the life she'd known for 5 years, had been slammed and locked. Inside was every memory, every piece of her identity, every book she'd ever loved. Outside was nothing. Julian Thorne hadn't just divorced her, he had surgically excised her from his world. He was a rising star in private equity, a disciple of the Blackstone School of Corporate Rating, and he believed in ruthless efficiency. Amelia, the quiet art history graduate from a state school in Ohio, had been his passion project. He'd found her working at a small gallery, loved her raw intelligence, and decided to polish her. He taught her which fork to use, which designers to wear, and which opinions to have. In return, she had loved him with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. She had believed his critiques were for her own good, his controlling nature a form of protection. The end came swiftly. Julian was closing a deal that would make him a partner at his firm, a deal with a powerful old-money family from Boston. They had a daughter perfect and pedigreed with a trust fund that could swallow Julian's net worth whole. Amelia, with her humble origins and quiet passions, was suddenly a liability. "You just don't fit anymore, Amelia." He'd said that morning, his voice devoid of emotion as he sipped his single-origin espresso. "We're moving in different circles now. I need a partner, not a student. You were a wonderful project, but the project is over." She had tried to argue, to remind him of their vows, of the nights she'd stayed up helping him with presentations, of the genuine love she felt for him. He had simply laughed, a short barking sound. "Love, Amelia, this was an arrangement. You got a taste of a life you could never have dreamed of, and I had a beautiful, adoring woman on my arm. The arrangement is terminated." His mother, Veronica Thorne, a woman who looked as if she were carved from ice, had overseen the eviction. She'd walked through the house, pointing at items with a manicured finger. "That's a Thorne family heirloom. That was a gift to my son." "Her personal effects are negligible, I assume," she'd said to the housekeeper, not even looking at Amelia. They had allowed her one small box. A few books, a framed photo of her late parents, and her grandmother's locket. As she stood on the street clutching the soggy cardboard, Julian's parting words echoed in her ears. "Go back to whatever provincial life you crawled out of. It's where you belong." She had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, and her only living relative was an aunt in a nursing home. The friends she'd made in New York were Julian's friends, their loyalty bought and paid for. Her bank account, a joint one, had been frozen. He'd left her with $87 in her purse. A taxi hissed past, splashing grimy water onto her ankles. Humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling sickness in her stomach. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was erased. Julian hadn't just taken her home, he had taken her name, her confidence, her future. As she huddled under the awning of a closed bakery, shivering, she made a silent, desperate vow. She didn't know how, but she would not be broken. She would survive. And one day Julian Thorne would remember her name. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motel rooms paid for in cash, lukewarm coffee, and the constant gnawing fear of the future. Amelia sold the last piece of her old life, a pair of diamond earrings Julian had given her for their first anniversary, for a pittance at a pawn shop. It was enough for a security deposit on a tiny walk-up apartment in Queens, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The silence was the hardest part. The brownstone had always been filled with noise. Julian's conference calls, the clatter of the housekeeper, the hum of the city. Here, the only sound was the drip of a leaky faucet and the frantic beating of her own heart. She spent days applying for jobs, her resume feeling like a work of fiction. Personal assistant to Julian Thorne. Household manager. Event coordinator for Thorne social functions. Everything was tied to him. The rejections were polite but firm. No one in that rarefied world wanted Julian Thorne's discarded wife. Desperate, she reached back into her past to the one place Julian hadn't been able to touch her education. She found an email address for Dr. Alistair Finch, her old art history professor, a man who had once told her she had a rare and intuitive eye for provenance. She wrote him a carefully worded email, omitting the humiliating details of her divorce, and simply stated she was seeking opportunities in the art world again. To her surprise, he replied within an hour. He remembered her. He mentioned a position he'd heard about, nothing glamorous, he warned. It was a contract role in the archives of the Morgan Library and Museum, specifically for a new acquisition of a lesser-known Renaissance benefactor's correspondence. The pay was abysmal, the work tedious. It was a job for a graduate student, not a woman who had until recently worn Chanel to lunch. Amelia took it without a second thought. The archives were a quiet, dusty sanctuary. Her world shrank to the smell of aging paper, the soft scratch of her pencil, and the intricate loops of 500-year-old Italian script. Her job was to catalog, cross-reference, and translate letters looking for mentions of art commissions or transactions. It was painstaking, methodical work that forced her to focus on something other than the gaping wound in her life. For months, her life consisted of the subway ride to Manhattan, 8 hours in the hushed silence of the archives, and the subway ride back to her empty apartment. She slowly rebuilt a routine. She stopped thinking about what Julian was doing, who he was with. The shame began to recede, replaced by a quiet, fierce pride in her work. She rediscovered the passion Julian had tried to extinguish. He had called her love for art a quaint little hobby. Here in the archives, it was her lifeline. One rainy afternoon, she was working on a particularly dense bundle of letters from a Florentine banker. Everyone else had dismissed them as dry financial records. But Amelia's intuition, the one Dr. Finch had praised, kicked in. She noticed a recurring symbol watermarked on the paper, one she didn't recognize. She also noticed that certain phrases seemingly about wool and dye shipments were repeated with odd, unnatural frequency. It was a code. She spent the next 3 weeks of her own time late nights in her tiny apartment surrounded by history books and cryptography primers trying to crack it. Finally, she did. The letters weren't about textiles. They were a hidden ledger detailing the secret patronage of a reclusive sculptor, a contemporary of Donatello, who was thought to have produced only a handful of works. These letters detailed the locations of 3 lost bronze statues, masterpieces no one knew existed. She knew what she had found was monumental. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a discovery that could rewrite a chapter of art history and be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. For the first time in a long time, Amelia felt a surge of power. It wasn't Julian's power, borrowed and temporary. It was hers, earned. She typed up her findings into a formal report, her hands trembling slightly. She had a choice. She could give this to the museum, where it would be absorbed by the institution, and she would get a footnote in an academic journal. Or she could do something else. Something bolder. She thought of Julian's dismissive laugh. A quaint little hobby. She began researching the world's most powerful and discreet art collectors. Men who operated outside the traditional auction houses, who valued secrecy and, above all, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. One name kept appearing whispered in articles and forums with a kind of reverence and fear: Damien Blackwood. Damien Blackwood was less a man and more a myth in the worlds of finance and art. His firm Sterling Global was a leviathan with interests in everything from renewable energy to satellite technology. He was notoriously private, a ghost who moved between his homes in London, Tokyo, and New York. But his one known obsession was art-specifically lost or disputed pieces from the Italian Renaissance. He didn't just collect, he hunted. Getting to a man like Damien Blackwood was next to impossible. He was insulated by layers of assistants, lawyers, and security. Amelia spent a week trying to find a way and hitting one dead end after another. Then she found a name in an old art world directory, Harrison Vance, the curator of the Blackwood collection. He was giving a lecture at the Frick collection in 2 days. Amelia used the last of her savings to buy a simple but elegant navy blue dress from a consignment shop. She spent hours on her hair and makeup, not trying to look like the woman Julian had styled, but like a serious, confident professional. She looked in the mirror and saw for the first time in a year a glimmer of the woman she used to be, but stronger, her eyes holding a new steely resolve. At the lecture, she listened intently, waiting for the Q&A. When it came, she didn't ask a question. She made a statement. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice clear and steady in the silent hall. "Your point about the influence of Medici banking practices on the patronage of minor sculptors is fascinating. However, it overlooks the coded ledgers used by bankers like the Bardi family to conceal transactions for politically sensitive artists, a practice which has led to a significant underestimation of the oeuvres of masters like Niccolò de Conti." A murmur went through the audience. Harrison Vance, a portly man with a perpetually skeptical expression, peered at her over his glasses. "That is a rather bold and unsubstantiated theory. Miss Sterling," she said, using her mother's maiden name for the first time. "A clean break. Amelia Sterling. And I have the substantiation." After the lecture, Vance cornered her, his skepticism warring with his professional curiosity. Amelia gave him nothing but a single tantalizing page of her translated notes. "This is part of a larger discovery," she said calmly. "I believe it will be of specific interest to Mr. Blackwood. If he wishes to see the rest, he can contact me directly." She gave him her card, a simple one she'd had printed that morning with just her name, email, and number. Then she walked away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was the biggest gamble of her life. For 2 days there was nothing. Amelia began to despair, the brief surge of confidence draining away, leaving the familiar dregs of doubt. Then on the 3rd day an unknown number flashed on her phone. The voice on the other end was deep calm and radiated an authority that needed no introduction. "Ms. Sterling, this is Damien Blackwood. Mr. Vance has shown me your appetizer. It's intriguing. I'm at my penthouse at 15 Central Park West. Be here in 1 hour." The line went dead. An hour later, a private elevator opened directly into an apartment that was less a home and more a private museum, floating above the city. The walls were lined with masterpieces, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there. And standing by a floor-to-ceiling window looking out over Central Park was Damien Blackwood. He was nothing like Julian. Where Julian was all polished, preening charm, Blackwood was stillness and intensity. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes so piercingly intelligent they seemed to see right through her. He was dressed simply in dark trousers and a gray cashmere sweater, but he wore an aura of power more potent than any designer suit. "You claim to have found 3 lost bronzes," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I have," Amelia said, matching his directness. She opened her briefcase and laid her complete, meticulously researched report on a massive oak table. The coded correspondence of Giovanni Bardi. It provides triangulation for locations in a Florentine monastery, a private villa in Tuscany, and unbelievably a forgotten storehouse in Valletta, Malta. He spent the next hour reading his silence absolute. Amelia stood, her posture perfect, refusing to fidget or show any sign of nerves. Finally he looked up, his eyes locking with hers. "This is either the most brilliant discovery of the century," he said slowly, "or the most elaborate fraud I've ever seen." "It's not a fraud," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "I'm sending a team to Florence tonight. If the monastery location yields what you say it will, We'll discuss your compensation. If it doesn't, you will never work in the art world or any other world again. Is that clear? Perfectly? Amelia replied, her voice unshakable. He nodded, a flicker of something respect perhaps in his eyes. Tell me, Miss Sterling, he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. How did a woman with your talent end up cataloging dusty letters for pocket money? Amelia met his gaze without flinching. I was in the archives of forgotten things, Mr. Blackwood. It seems I have a talent for finding value where no one else thought to look. The 48 hours that followed were the longest of Amelia's life. She went to her job at the museum, her body on autopilot while her mind was thousands of miles away in a Florentine monastery. She expected Blackwood's men to be discreet, but she knew the art world was a small, gossipy place. If this was real, word would eventually get out. If it was a failure, her humiliation would be absolute. The call came at 4:00 a.m. New York time. It was Damien Blackwood again. The bronze is there, Ms. Sterling, he said, and for the first time Amelia could hear a trace of excitement in his voice. A depiction of David Post's sleigh. It's magnificent. My team is securing it now. Congratulations. Relief washed over Amelia so powerfully her knees went weak. Thank you. I'm in London. My jet will be at Teterboro Airport at 9:00 a.m. to bring you here. We need to plan the acquisition of the other two pieces immediately, and we need to do it before this news breaks. Pack a bag. You won't be going back to your apartment in Queens for a while. Her life changed in the span of a single phone call. The world of Damien Blackwood was one of quiet, limitless efficiency. A black car was waiting for her. The private jet was a Gulfstream G650, its interior more like a luxury hotel suite than an aircraft. When she landed in London, another car whisked her to a magnificent townhouse overlooking Regent's Park. Damien was there along with a team of art historians, security experts, and lawyers, and Amelia was at the center of it all. Damien didn't treat her like an employee. He treated her like a colleague, a fellow strategist. He listened to her insights, deferred to her knowledge of the period, and valued her opinion. For Amelia, who had spent 5 years being told her thoughts were secondary, it was intoxicating. She blossomed under the respect he showed her. Over the next few weeks, they were a whirlwind of activity. They traveled to Tuscany, where under the guise of a historical survey they located the second statue in the cellar of a dilapidated villa. The final piece in Malta was the most difficult, requiring a delicate negotiation with the government, a negotiation Damien handled with masterful diplomacy, crediting Amelia's research as the key to the breakthrough. In that time, a bond formed between them that went beyond their professional collaboration. They shared late-night dinners in Rome, discussing everything from Renaissance politics to their own pasts. Amelia found herself opening up to him in a way she never had with Julian. She told him about her quiet upbringing, her love for history, and eventually about her marriage. She explained it clinically, factually, focusing on the way Julian had tried to erase her passion and her personality. Damien listened, his intense gaze never leaving her face. He wasn't polishing you, he said, when she finished, his voice dangerously soft. He was trying to varnish over something he knew he could never possess. Your mind. He was a fool. He began to see the woman Julian had tried to hide. He saw her brilliance, her resilience, and a deep, quiet strength. The professional respect between them slowly, organically deepened into something more. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a gradual meeting of minds and souls built on a foundation of shared passion and mutual admiration. One evening, after the successful acquisition of the final statue, they stood on the balcony of his suite at the Hôtel de Paris in Monaco, looking out at the glittering harbor. The art world was now in an uproar over the Blackwood bronzes, and Amelia Sterling was the mysterious name credited with the discovery. You've given me something priceless, Amelia, Damien said, turning to her. The statues are magnificent, she agreed. I wasn't talking about the statues, he said. He reached out his hand, gently touching her cheek. You've reminded me that true value is rarely on the surface. What do you want, Amelia? As your compensation. Name your price. Amelia thought for a moment. She could ask for a sum of money that would make her independently wealthy for life. But she realized that wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was to never be powerless again. I don't want a finder's fee, she said, her voice clear and strong. I want a position. I want to be your chief acquisitions advisor and head of provenance for Sterling Global. I want to build a real career on my own terms. A slow smile spread across Damien's face. It transformed his severe features, making him breathtakingly handsome. Done, he said. But I have a counteroffer. He stepped closer, his presence filling her senses. I'd also like to offer you the position of the woman by my side, at dinner tomorrow night, and perhaps the night after that. Amelia's heart soared. I accept, she whispered. Meanwhile, back in New York, the news of the Blackwood bronzes was the talk of the town. Julian Thorne, now a full partner at his firm, read the articles in the Wall Street Journal with a collector's envy. He saw the name Amelia Sterling and felt a brief passing curiosity about the brilliant new art historian who had mesmerized the world's most elusive billionaire. The name meant nothing to him. His ex-wife, the mousy, forgettable Amelia, had long since faded from his memory, presumably living some drab, insignificant life back in Ohio. He had no idea the ghost of his past was about to become the architect of his future. 6 months passed. Amelia was no longer the woman who had shivered on a Manhattan sidewalk. She was Amelia Sterling, a respected and formidable figure in the international art scene. Dressed in bespoke suits and elegant gowns, she moved with an effortless confidence through the auction houses of Sotheby's and Christie's, her opinion capable of adding millions to the value of a painting. Her relationship with Damien had deepened into a profound love. He was her partner in every sense of the word, a man who celebrated her intelligence and championed her ambition. The culmination of her work was to be the unveiling of the 3 Blackwood bronzes at a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the most anticipated social event of the year. The entire upper echelon of New York society would be there, captains of industry, old money scions, and the new titans of finance, including Julian and Veronica Thorne. Julian's firm had been seeking a partnership with Sterling Global for months. Damien's company was looking to acquire a portfolio of distressed tech assets, and Julian's firm held the key to the deal. It was the transaction that would elevate Julian from a mere partner to a legend at his company. He had been trying for weeks to get a meeting with the reclusive Damien Blackwood to no avail. The gala was his chance to finally corner the man. Amelia felt a tremor of anxiety as she prepared for the evening. She would be seeing Julian for the first time since he had thrown her out. Are you ready for this? Damien asked, coming up behind her as she stood before the mirror in their penthouse. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown that shimmered under the light, her neck adorned with a simple but breathtaking diamond necklace, a gift from him. I am, she said, her voice more certain than she felt. He's a part of my past, a past you helped me escape. He is, Damien said, his voice hardening slightly. And tonight he will learn that the past is never as far away as we think. They arrived at the Met to a frenzy of flashbulbs. Damien Blackwood's first public appearance with a woman on his arm was major news. They swept through the grand hall, Damien's hand resting possessively on the small of Amelia's back. Julian and his new fiancée, the Boston heiress, were holding court near the entrance to the main exhibition hall. He looked smug and prosperous, the picture of success. His mother, Veronica, stood beside him, her gaze sweeping the room with haughty disapproval. Julian saw Damien Blackwood enter and immediately began to move towards him, a practiced, charming smile fixed on his face. Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Julian Thorne. I've been... He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had fallen on the woman at Blackwood's side. The smile froze on his face, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed disbelief. It was Amelia, but it couldn't be. This woman was poised, radiant, exuding a confidence and power that was utterly foreign to him. The mousy girl from Ohio was gone. In her place was a goddess. Amelia. The name was a choked whisper. Amelia met his gaze, her expression perfectly, coolly neutral. "Hello, Julian," she said, her voice even and calm. Veronica Thorne's face paled, then flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this? What are you doing here?" Before Amelia could reply, Damien spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "She is here with me." He turned his full attention to Julian, his eyes as cold as a winter sea. "So you're Thorne. My head of acquisitions, Ms. Sterling, has been advising me on your firm's proposal." The blood drained from Julian's face. Ms. Sterling. Amelia Sterling, the brilliant art historian, was his ex-wife, the one he had discarded. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The woman whose opinion held the fate of his career-making deal was the same woman he had thrown out in the rain. "Your head of acquisitions?" he stammered, looking from Amelia's calm face to Damien's thunderous one. "Indeed," Damien said smoothly. "Amelia is one of my most trusted advisors. Her eye for value and for forgery is unparalleled. She has concerns about your portfolio. She finds some of your asset valuations to be overly optimistic, bordering on fraudulent, in fact." Amelia allowed herself a small, icy smile. "You always did have a tendency to overpromise, Julian." The carefully constructed world of Julian Thorne shattered in that moment. Every head in their vicinity had turned. The whispers started spreading through the gala like wildfire. The humiliation was palpable, a thick, choking cloud. He had called her his greatest failed project, and now his entire future depended on her. He looked at her, at the woman he had so carelessly broken, and for the first time he didn't see a project or a possession. He saw a queen, and he realized with a sickening certainty that throwing her away was the single greatest mistake of his entire life. The fallout from the gala was immediate and catastrophic for Julian. The whispers about his connection to the now famous Amelia Sterling, coupled with Damien Blackwood's public dismissal, sent shockwaves through his firm. The Sterling Global deal was dead on arrival. His partners, smelling blood in the water, began to circle. His carefully crafted reputation was in tatters. Desperate, Julian started trying to contact Amelia. He sent flowers which were returned. He sent pleading emails which went unanswered. He even had the audacity to show up at the Sterling Global headquarters only to be politely but firmly removed by security. His desperation culminated in an ambush. He found out which restaurant Amelia and Damien favored for quiet lunches, Le Bernardin, and waited for them. He cornered Amelia as she was leaving, Damien having been held back by a phone call. "Amelia, please, you have to talk to me," he begged, his voice raw. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic pleading tone. "You've ruined me." "I did nothing, Julian," Amelia said, her voice cold. "Your own actions led you here. You built your life on a foundation of lies and cruelty. Sooner or later it was bound to collapse." "It was my mother," he blurted out, his eyes wild. "She was the one who pushed me. She said you weren't good enough, that you were holding me back. I was weak. I listened to her. But I loved you, Leah. I swear I did." Amelia just stared at him, unmoved by the crocodile tears. The man before her was a stranger, a weak, hollow shell. But his mention of his mother sparked something else. A loose thread from the past. Veronica had always been obsessed with bloodlines and legacy. She had once made a cruel comment about Amelia's own family, calling them anonymous Ohio dirt. Amelia's parents had died in a car crash when she was a teenager, and she knew little about her father's side of the family, other than that he had been a painter who had given up his art to support them. That night, driven by a sudden, inexplicable curiosity, Amelia went into the box of belongings she'd taken from the brownstone. At the bottom was a small leather-bound journal of her father's, filled with sketches and notes. She'd never been able to bring herself to read it. The grief was too raw. Now she opened it. The sketches were brilliant, filled with a raw, chaotic energy. But it was the notes that made her stop breathing. He wrote of his youth in New York in the 1970s, of running with the abstract expressionist crowd, of a rivalry with a young upcoming Jean-Michel Basquiat. And he wrote of his real name. He had changed it when he moved to Ohio to escape something. His birth name was Alexander Sterling, the same last name Amelia had instinctively adopted. Her hands shaking, she began a frantic online search. Alexander Sterling was not a famous artist. He was a ghost, a myth, a brilliant painter who had produced a handful of masterpieces in his early 20s and then vanished, completely presumed dead. His few authenticated works were considered priceless, held in the private collections of the world's wealthiest people. Experts had lamented for decades about the lost Sterling legacy. He hadn't vanished. He had run away to Ohio, fallen in love with her mother, and hidden his genius to live a simple life. The journal was the key. It contained sketches of his lost works, details of his techniques and letters that would prove his identity beyond any doubt. And then came the final twist, the one that made the floor drop out from beneath her. In the back of the journal, tucked into a hidden sleeve, was a legal document. It was a deed of trust established by her father's estranged family, a wealthy old New York family who had disowned him for becoming an artist. The trust had been set up to mature on his 60th birthday, or upon confirmation of his death. The assets it contained were staggering: a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, real estate in Manhattan, and the complete untouched collection of all the paintings Alexander Sterling had created before he disappeared. The collection was stored in a private, climate-controlled vault in Geneva. Amelia was not just the daughter of a forgotten painter. She was the sole heir to a fortune that dwarfed Julian's and potentially even rivaled a portion of Damien's. She was the owner of a collection of art that would make her a global powerhouse in her own right. Veronica Thorne hadn't just pushed her son to discard a girl from Ohio. She had unknowingly cast out the heiress to the legendary Sterling legacy, a name far more powerful and respected in the circles she cared about than her own. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. Amelia looked at the documents, then looked at her reflection in the dark window of the penthouse. The journey was complete. She had started with nothing, found power through her own intellect with Damien's help, and now she had discovered a legacy that was hers, and hers alone. She didn't need Damien's wealth or protection. She was his equal in every way. The final confrontation with Julian wouldn't be as Damien Blackwood's bride. It would be as Amelia Sterling, master of her own destiny. The final unraveling of Julian Thorne was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, grinding erosion. The weeks following the Met Gala were a masterclass in social and financial collapse. The Sterling Global deal, once his crowning achievement, had vaporized, taking with it the confidence of his partners and investors. His name, once a synonym for Midas-like success, was now whispered with a mixture of pity and contempt in the exclusive clubs and restaurants where he had once been king. He was a cautionary tale told over glasses of vintage port. He began selling his assets not out of strategy, but out of sheer bleeding necessity. The Hamptons estate went first, then the collection of rare Richard Mille watches, and finally the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. Each sale was a public stripping of his identity, a dismantling of the facade he had spent his life constructing. His heiress fiancée, seeing the financial storm on the horizon and the social stain of his connection to the ascendant Amelia Sterling, had quietly and unceremoniously returned his ring via a courier. He was left with his cavernous, empty brownstone, a mountain of debt, and a single remaining asset of significant value, a painting he'd acquired at the height of his power, a mid-sized abstract by Willem de Kooning. It was his last claim to the world. He had lost his final bastion of perceived sophistication and wealth. It was this painting that Amelia chose as the stage for their final act. She didn't approach him directly. That would have been too simple, too merciful. Instead, she operated through layers of influence, a ghost pulling strings from a world he could no longer access. She had a trusted associate, A distinguished silver-haired art consultant named Marcus Adler reached out to Sotheby's. Adler, a man Julian had once tried and failed to impress, informed the auction house that his anonymous high-net-worth client had a keen interest in acquiring a de Kooning from that specific period and was willing to bypass the auction process for a private sale provided the piece was right. The bait was set. Sotheby's, eager to broker such a lucrative deal, immediately contacted Julian. To Julian, the inquiry felt like a divine intervention, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. An anonymous European buyer, he was told. The price they were floating was more than enough to silence his most aggressive creditors and give him a chance to start again. He clung to this hope with the desperation of a drowning man. On the day of the viewing, Julian spent an hour he didn't have on his appearance. He wore his last good suit, a Brioni, that now hung slightly loose on his frame, a testament to sleepless nights and a diet of anxiety. He walked into the grand Sotheby's building on York Avenue, forcing a confident stride, nodding at the staff who now looked at him with a polite, clinical distance. He was no longer a major player, he was just a seller, another man parting with his treasures. He was escorted to a private viewing room on the upper floor. These rooms were designed for discretion and comfort with soft gray walls, hushed lighting, and expensive leather chairs. On a single starkly lit easel in the center of the room stood his de Kooning, its chaotic beauty a stark contrast to the sterile environment. He waited, his heart hammering against his ribs, rehearsing his pitch, his story of the painting's provenance. The door opened. Julian turned, his most charming professional smile already forming on his lips, and then it froze, cracking like thin ice. It was Amelia. She stood there alone, a vision of calm, collected power in a simple, impeccably tailored black dress. She looked not at him, but at the painting, her expression one of intense professional scrutiny. For a full 10 seconds she said nothing, letting the silence stretch and thicken with his shock. His mind raced, cycling through a dozen impossible scenarios. Was she here to gloat, to torment him? Or his desperate heart foolishly wondered, was she here to save him? To buy his painting as an act of pity? A final, merciful gesture, Amelia. He finally managed, his voice a dry rasp. What is this? What are you doing here? Due diligence, she said, her voice cool and even as she finally turned her gaze from the painting to him. I'm the potential buyer. Or rather, I was. The last flicker of hope in Julian's chest died instantly, replaced by a cold dread. This was not a rescue. This was a reckoning. You... He stammered the word, catching in his throat. How could you possibly... I have my own resources now, Julian, she said, cutting through his disbelief. She took a step towards the painting, running a finger near the edge of the canvas without touching it. I always thought there was something wrong with this piece, even when it was hanging in our dining room. The brushwork in the lower left quadrant. It's too controlled. The impasto is hesitant. It bothered me, but of course my opinion didn't matter back then, did it? It was just another of my quaint little hobbies. She walked over to a sleek mahogany table and picked up a thick leather-bound folder. She opened it, revealing dozens of pages of graphs, microscopic images, and dense technical reports. I had it analyzed before I agreed to this meeting. X-ray fluorescence pigment analysis, infrared reflectography. The titanium white pigment used in the base layer contains rutile, which de Kooning didn't start using consistently until 3 years after this piece was supposedly created. The signature is flawless to the naked eye, but under magnification you can see the microscopic tremors of a forger, not the fluid confidence of a master. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and sharp, devoid of any emotion but a clinical certainty. It's a masterful forgery, Julian, a brilliant fake. It's aesthetically pleasing, but financially and historically it's worthless. She let the file fall shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. It's just like the life you built. And it's just like the portfolio of inflated assets you tried to sell to Sterling Global. The blood drained from Julian's face. The painting wasn't just his last financial hope. It was his last connection to his former glory, a symbol of his supposed taste and acumen. To learn it was a fake, a lie, was to be told his entire judgment, his entire identity was fraudulent. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in denial. "That's impossible. It was vetted by the best." "The best can be fooled," Amelia countered, her voice relentless. "Especially when the buyer wants so badly to believe in the fantasy." She took a step closer to him, and for the first time he could see the fire in her eyes. This wasn't just about a painting. This was about 5 years of his life he had stolen from her. "That's what you do, isn't it, Julian? You sell fantasies. You sold one to your partners, your clients, and you sold one to me. The fantasy that you were a man of substance. The fantasy that our marriage was a partnership. But it was all a forgery." He finally broke. The carefully constructed dam of his pride crumbled, and a wave of pathetic desperation poured out. "Please, Leah," he begged, using the old pet name, a violation that made her flinch. "Don't do this. You've won. You have everything. Blackwood, the money, the fame. You've ruined me. Isn't that enough?" "This isn't about revenge," she said, her voice dropping to an intense, quiet register. "This is about truth. Something you've never understood. You think my life is about Damien. You think my power is borrowed from him. That's the same mistake you made 5 years ago. You thought you could give me value, and therefore you thought you could take it away." He saw an opening, a chance to appeal to the woman he thought he knew. "I loved you," he said, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I did. I was a fool, pressured by my mother, by my ambitions. But what we had was real." Amelia laughed. It wasn't a sound of humor, but of pure, crystalline irony. "What we had was a lie, Julian. And you want to talk about your mother? Let's talk about her. Let's talk about legacy and bloodlines, the things she valued above all else." She walked over to a discreet panel on the wall and pressed a button. A large screen descended silently from the ceiling. With a tap on her phone, an image appeared on the screen. It was a painting, a work of breathtaking power and beauty, an abstract explosion of color, rage, and life that made the fake de Kooning on the easel look like a child's drawing. Julian stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "This," Amelia said, her voice ringing with a pride and power he had never heard before, "is the Phoenix #1, the first in a series of lost masterpieces. My father's work." She swiped on her phone, and the image was replaced by a digital version of a catalog. On the cover was the same painting, and beneath it the text, "Alexander Sterling, The Lost Collection, an exhibition curated by Amelia Sterling." Julian read the name, his mind struggling to connect the dots. "Sterling? That's your name now." "It was always my name," she declared, her voice resonating with the weight of generations. "It was my father's birth name. He changed it when he left New York to escape the art world, to escape a family that didn't understand him. He was a myth, a ghost who experts thought had died in the 80s. But he didn't. He fell in love, moved to Ohio, and raised a daughter." She brought up another slide, a financial valuation report from a Swiss bank. The numbers so large they seemed unreal. "Your mother was so obsessed with my background, with my anonymous family. She pushed you to discard me for a woman with a proper lineage." "Well, Julian, my father's name, the Sterling name, carries a legacy in this city, in the world she so desperately wants to impress, that makes the Thorne name look like a footnote. I am the sole heir to his entire collection, to his estate, a fortune that makes your life's work look like a rounding error." The full catastrophic truth finally crashed down on Julian Thorne. The scale of his mistake was so immense, so cosmically stupid, that it defied comprehension. He had stood on a mountain of diamonds and complained he didn't have a view. He had held the winning lottery ticket in his hand and thrown it into the fire because he didn't like the color of the paper. He had thrown away a woman he deemed worthless, only to discover she was in every conceivable way priceless. He sank into one of the leather chairs, his body unable to support the weight of his failure. He looked at Amelia, truly looked at her for the first time not as a possession or a project, but as the formidable self-possessed woman she was, and he felt a sense of loss so profound it was a physical ache in his chest. Amelia delivered the final devastating blow, her voice devoid of hatred, speaking only a simple, hard truth. "You once stood in our doorway and called me your greatest failed project. You were wrong. You were never my creator. You were my cage. Escaping you, rediscovering myself, finding my own legacy, that was my greatest project. And it has been an unqualified success." She turned and walked towards the door, her posture erect, her step sure and steady. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. There was nothing left in that room for her but ghosts and a worthless painting. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the city. Damien was waiting for her, leaning against his car, not with an ounce of impatience, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew her worth. He searched her face and saw not the strain of battle, but the serene calm of a war finally won. He simply opened the car door for her. As she slid into the seat, he got in beside her. "Where to, Ms. Sterling?" he asked, his voice filled with a deep well of love and respect. Amelia looked out the window at the city that had once cast her out. It was her city now. She was no longer just the billionaire's bride. She was the Sterling legacy. She was a founder, a curator, a force in her own right. And she was a woman in love with a man who saw all of it and cherished her for it. "Let's go home," she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that day. "We have an exhibition to plan." Amelia Sterling's story isn't just about marrying a billionaire. It's a powerful testament to the fact that our true value is never determined by who we are with, but by who we are. It's about rediscovering the passion and strength that lies dormant within us, waiting for the chance to ignite. Julian saw her as a reflection of his own ambition, but Damien, and more importantly Amelia herself, saw her for the brilliant, resilient woman she always was. Her journey from a rain-slicked sidewalk left with nothing to the pinnacle of the art world shows us that the most spectacular comebacks are not funded by money, but forged in the fires of our own self-worth and determination. If Amelia's journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of second chances, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of resilience and redemption. Thank you for listening.